The tentpole went through Vin's shoulder before anyone heard the wind change. Mud and blood mixed under the rain, and Marlowe was already moving, knees skidding, hands finding the wound before his brain caught up to what they were doing. The storm screamed across Theta 7 like something with a grudge. Somewhere behind him, Ulzen was shouting orders that the wind tore apart before they reached anyone. "Stay with me," Marlowe said, not loud, just steady. He unhooked the thermos from his belt out of habit, then dropped it in the mud and reached for the jar instead. Glass, squat, sealed tight against the rain. Inside, a thick golden substance caught the one working floodlight and held it, the way honey always did, like it had swallowed the light and meant to keep it. 3 of the spore packets were already useless, soaked through, the powder turning to grey paste in Zun's shaking hands. The paste Zira carried wouldn't pack into a wound this deep. There was exactly one option left on this whole muddy stretch of training planet, and it was sitting in a jar that the entire class had once called insect vomit. Marlowe cracked the lid. "How much do you have left?" Ulzen shouted, dropping to pin Vin's good arm down. Marlowe didn't answer right away. He was already packing the wound, fingers moving fast, sure, like he'd done this before in places that didn't have a medbay 3 hours out. The honey went in golden and slow, and Vin's breathing hitched, and the storm kept screaming, and nobody in that mud pit knew yet whether a jar of bee spit was about to save a cadet's arm or not. "Enough," Marlowe said. "I hope." He didn't sound hopeful. He sounded like a man doing math he didn't want to do. The lightning showed his face for half a second. Calm, focused, already 3 hours ahead, already wondering if it would be enough. "I'll be honest. I didn't think a kid with a thermos and a jar of bug vomit was going to be the reason any of us made it off that planet. But that's getting ahead of things. Stay close. This one earns the ending." The thermos had been on his belt 3 weeks before any of this started, back when the worst thing in the room was a chemistry demonstration that went sideways. The explosion was small, but loud enough to make half the class duck instinctively. Smoke curled up from Pethalla's workstation, where a containment seal had failed during a routine compound demo. Nobody was hurt. Instructor Ulzen Voskor didn't even look up from his data pad until the alarm cut out. "Pethalla, recalibrate your seal ratios before next session." He tapped the pad twice, the way he did before any announcement that mattered. "Everyone, sit. Today's lesson changes." The dome smelled like ozone and singed plastic. 40 cadets settled back into their seats, scales and membranes, and too many arms folding down across desks built for nobody in particular. Ulzen walked to the center of the floor, hands behind his back, silver-tipped ridges catching the overhead light. "Your assignment is simple," he said. "Bring a traditional medicinal substance from your home world, not from a lab, not from a replicator, from your world, your people, something with cultural and survival value." A Threntite cadet near the front, Vin, rigid-postured even when relaxed, raised one of his 6 arms in perfect unison with the question forming on his face. "Define traditional." "Older than the Accord, older than most of your grandparents, something your people trusted before anyone had proof it worked." Marlowe sat near the back, chewing on a strip of dried something that smelled faintly of smoke and salt. He didn't raise his hand. He just asked, flat and easy, the way he asked most things. "Does it have to make sense?" Ulzen's pale amber eyes settled on him for a long moment. "It has to work. Sense is optional." A few cadets laughed. Marlowe didn't. He just nodded once, like he'd already decided what he was bringing, and went back to chewing. Across the row, Zira flexed his translucent arms and muttered something about already having the perfect answer. Zun, towering even in his seat, said nothing, just smiled the slow smile of someone who'd grown up trusting fungus more than most people trusted family. Nobody in that room knew yet that one of them was about to bring something that would end up rewriting half the core medical compendium. Nobody knew the storm was coming, either. Theta 7 didn't care about syllabus dates. A week passed. long enough for rumors to spread about who was bringing what, short enough that nobody had time to actually research it. The dome didn't smell like a classroom that morning. It smelled like a biosurgery, sharp and sterile, with an undercurrent of something organic underneath that nobody could quite place yet. Long tables lined the floor, each one holding a cadet's contribution under a small placard. Some samples shimmered faintly under containment fields. One jar, belonging to a cadet from a gas giant colony, appeared to have its own gravitational field and kept drawing a slow halo of dust toward itself. Ulzen moved table to table, tablet in hand, logging each entry without much expression. Cultural context, biochemical function, survival application. Each presentation got a nod, sometimes a question, never more than that. Zira went first among the cadets Marlowe knew. He set down a wide ceramic dish of pale green paste, mint-scented, smooth as butter. Anti-inflammatory. My people have used it for 11 generations. It reduces swelling within the hour. Ulzen tapped his pad twice. Noted. Zun followed with a small vial of blue-grey spores, fine as powder, that drifted faintly even through the sealed glass. These induce cellular quiescence, pain suppression mostly, very effective. He said it the way a man says something he's never had reason to doubt. Then it was Marlowe's turn. He stepped up, set a squat glass jar on the table with an audible clink, and looked quite pleased with himself. Inside was a golden substance, thick, viscous, glossy, catching the dome lights and holding them like it had something to prove. For a second, nobody said anything. What, Zira said slowly, is that? Honey, Marlowe said. You eat that? Pithala's harmonic whine pitched up, equal parts disgust and fascination. That is literal vomit. It's insect vomit. Filtered sugar vomit, Marlowe corrected, entirely unbothered. From very determined bees. The laughter that went through the room wasn't unkind, exactly, but it wasn't respectful either. Vin's mandibles clicked twice in what passed for a Threntite shrug. Zun raised an eyebrow ridge and said nothing, which from Zun was nearly an insult. Ulzen studied the jar for a long moment, the way he studied anything he hadn't decided about yet. Explain. Bees make it from flower nectar, Marlowe said. Chew it, spit it back up, do that about 100 times until it's thick enough. Then they seal it in wax and store it. He shrugged. Sounds gross, works anyway. Define works. Low water activity, Marlowe said, like he was reciting something he'd heard 100 times around a kitchen table. Bacteria need moisture to grow. Honey doesn't give them any. It also pulls fluid out of a wound, which keeps it clean, and it releases hydrogen peroxide slow enough to kill microbes without cooking your own tissue. Ulzen tapped his pad. Didn't write anything yet. There's no clinical trial behind that claim, he said. There's about 10,000 years of one, Marlowe said. Just not the kind you log. A few cadets shifted at that. Zira's mouth pressed into a thin line, the universal expression of someone who suspected he'd just been quietly out-argued and didn't appreciate it. Ulzen finally tapped the entry into his pad. Logged. Provisional. He looked up, gaze moving across the room, weighing something. Theta 7 deployment begins in 4 days. Field conditions will decide what actually works, not this table. He didn't look at Marlowe's jar again, but he didn't dismiss it either. And somewhere past the dome's reinforced walls, where the sensors on Theta 7 were already logging a pressure system that nobody on that planet's survey team had bothered flagging as a concern. Theta 7 looked peaceful from orbit. It did not look peaceful from the ground. Half forest, half sand, with a weather system that changed its mind every 6 hours, the training planet had a reputation among instructors for humbling cadets fast. Marlowe liked it immediately. It reminded him of home, if home had 2 suns and trees that hummed when the wind hit them right. The drop pods landed in a clearing at first light. 20 cadets, full packs, 3 instructors on rotation. Ulzen walked the perimeter once, tapped his data pad twice, and said the only thing he ever said before a field exercise. Don't die. Everything else is negotiable. Nobody laughed. Everybody remembered it. By midday, Vin had already found a way to test that rule. He was scouting a ridge line, 6 arms moving with his usual rigid precision, when a loose shelf of rock gave way under his back legs. He went down hard, joints scraping across stone that had a faint mineral shimmer to it, the kind that meant contamination. By the time Marlowe reached him, the wound on Vin's lower arm joint was already weeping a thin orange, fluid, threntite blood, meeting Theta-7 dust, in a combination nobody had field tested. Report your status, Ulzen said, jogging up behind. Functional, Vin said, in the flat tone of someone who would say that with a missing limb. The wound is shallow. Shallow doesn't mean clean, Marlowe said. This was the moment Zira had been waiting for. He knelt fast, paste already out, applying it to the joint with the confident motions of someone who'd done this 100 times back home. Anti-inflammatory compound, standard treatment. He looked up at Marlowe, something close to a challenge in his expression. You want to add your honey, go ahead. We'll see which one actually does something. Marlowe didn't argue. He just split the wound site, paste on the upper half. Honey worked carefully into the lower. Vin watched both cadets work on him with the patient stillness of a species that didn't waste energy on complaint. This is informal, Ulzen said, watching closely now, but I'll log it. By evening, both sides looked about the same. Slightly swollen, slightly raw, nothing alarming. Zira looked pleased with himself. Marlowe just packed his jar away and didn't say anything, which Zira found more annoying than an argument would have been. Overnight, the temperature on Theta-7 dropped sharp enough to frost the tent stakes. By morning, the difference wasn't subtle anymore. The paste side of Vin's wound had gone an angry red, swollen at the edges, weeping more than it had the night before. The honey side had paled, tightened, already starting to close. Vin flexed the joint experimentally, testing both halves like he was comparing 2 different machines. The honey side hurts less, he reported, with the same flat precision he reported everything. Zira crossed his translucent arms. 1 data point isn't a trend. 2, Ulzen said, tapping his pad. He didn't look up. I'm counting the classroom demonstration as the first. Zira didn't have anything to say to that. 3 days into the exercise, the second test arrived in the form of a cooking fire that decided it didn't want to stay contained. Pithala had volunteered to manage the group's evening meal, which in retrospect was the kind of decision the whole squad would spend a long time unpacking later. The flame caught a loose membrane fold along his forearm before anyone noticed, and his skin, sensitive to heat in a way none of the other species fully understood, blistered fast, a long blue-black streak that made him emit a low harmonic whine none of them had heard before. That's pain, Zun said, already moving. I can handle pain. He pressed a packet of his blue-grey spores against the burn, releasing a fine mist that made Pithala's whine drop instantly into silence. The cadet's whole body relaxed, the tension bleeding out of his membrane in real time. There, Zun said, satisfied. Cellular quiescence. He won't feel a thing until morning. Marlowe watched the burn for a long moment without touching it. Did it occur to you that pain suppression might mask something worse? Zun's confidence flickered just slightly. It's a controlled compound. It doesn't cause infection. Didn't say it caused it, said it might hide it. Nobody argued with that out loud. But Marlowe noted the angle of the wound, the dampness creeping at its edge that had nothing to do with the spore mist, and he didn't pack his jar away that night. He was right to keep it close. By the next afternoon, Pithala's burn had a smell that hadn't been there before, sweet, wrong, the kind of sweet that meant something was breaking down instead of healing. His whine returned, low and constant, the spores no longer strong enough to mask whatever was happening underneath. Zun's confidence had gone fully quiet by then, which from Zun was as good as an apology. Infection, Marlowe said, crouching beside him. We need to flush it. He used what clean water the squad had left, then packed the wound with honey directly, layering it thick enough to fully cover the damaged tissue. Pethaler's whine pitched up once, sharp, then settled. "That stings," he managed. "Good," Marlowe said. "Means it's working on something." The squad gathered closer than they meant to, watching. Ulzen stood at the edge of the group, arms crossed, expression unreadable, but his data pad stayed in his hand the whole time, ready. "Bees are fanatics about contamination," Marlowe said, mostly to fill the silence while he worked. "Ever try raiding a hive without gear? You won't make that mistake twice. They keep everything in that hive sealed tighter than most labs I've seen. That's half of why this stuff doesn't rot, doesn't grow anything, doesn't go bad sitting in a jar for years. It's built to stay clean so the hive stays clean." "They built a sterile pharmacy," Zun said slowly, "by accident." "Wasn't an accident to them," Marlowe said. "Just survival." By morning, Pethaler's burn had stopped weeping. The smell was gone. The skin around the edges had started to pink instead of blacken, and for the first time since the trip began, nobody at that fire pit made a joke about insect vomit. Zira, sitting a short distance off, watched the whole exchange with his arms still crossed, his expression carefully unreadable. "I'm not saying you're right," he said finally. "Didn't ask you to," Marlowe said. I'm not saying you're wrong either." That from Zira was practically a parade. The shift in the squad happened the way most real shifts happen, quietly, without anyone announcing it. By the fifth day, cadets who'd laughed loudest at the jar were the ones asking how much honey Marlowe had left. Vin asked twice, with the literal precision of someone calculating exact remaining volume rather than making conversation. Zun started taking notes on application method, his pride bruised but his curiosity winning out. Even Pethaler, healing well now, kept glancing at the jar with something close to gratitude he didn't quite know how to phrase out loud. Ulzen said nothing about any of it. He just kept tapping entries into his data pad, logging field observations with the same flat precision he applied to everything, giving away nothing about what he actually thought. That changed on the sixth night. The squad had gathered around the main fire, packs stowed, exercise winding toward its final days, when Ulzen set his data pad down and looked across the flames at Marlowe, with an expression none of them had seen from him before. "I want to run a controlled comparison," he said. "Direct. Identical wounds, identical conditions, no variables I can't account for." "You want me to cut someone?" Marlowe asked. "I want you to cut me." The fire popped. Nobody spoke. "Both arms," Ulzen continued, tapping his pad twice out of habit, even though he wasn't reading from it. "Identical depth, identical location. Zira treats one side. You treat the other. 6 days, full documentation, no excuses if it goes wrong." "Sir, with respect," Zira started. "That's—" "If I expect you all to trust this process," Ulzen said, cutting him off without raising his voice, "I'll lead it." He rolled up both sleeves and held his arms out over the firelight, steady, deliberate, the silver tips of his ridges catching the flame. Marlowe looked at the offered arms for a long moment. Then he reached for his knife. "Your call," he said. 6 days. Behind him, in the dark beyond the firelight, none of them noticed the weather sensors on Marlowe's wrist unit blink once, register a pressure drop nobody on the survey team had flagged, and go quiet again. The storm was still 3 days out. Nobody at that fire knew it yet. The wind changed direction twice before breakfast, and Marlowe didn't like either direction it picked. He'd grown up reading weather the way other people read faces, and the air over Theta 7 that morning had the particular stillness that came right before something big decided to stop being polite about it. He checked his wrist unit. The pressure reading had dropped again overnight, quiet, steady, the kind of drop that didn't announce itself until it was already too late to argue with. "Something's coming," he told Ulzen at the morning briefing. Ulzen, sleeves still rolled from the night before, glanced at his own data pad. "Survey doesn't flag anything until tomorrow evening." "Survey's wrong." Ulzen studied him for a moment, the kind of look that weighed a claim against a record of being right before. He didn't argue. He just tapped the pad twice and moved the squad's extraction window up by half a day, which on a base that ran tight schedules was as close to an apology as Ulzen Voskor ever gave. The cut on his arms, 3 days old now, had already started telling its own story. The paste side, Zira's side, looked clean but slow, the swelling reduced, but the wound still raw at the center, still healing the way wounds were supposed to heal, at a pace that made sense to the body, not the kind that made anyone stop and stare. The honey side told a different story entirely. The edges had drawn closed tighter than expected, the new skin pale and smooth, no redness, no heat radiating off it when Marlowe checked. It itches, Ulzen said, flexing the arm. The honey side, not the other. That's it closing, Marlowe said. Should have strung worse going in, means it's doing its job. Zira leaned over to look, arms crossed, and for once didn't say anything sharp. He just looked for a long moment, jaw tight, the expression of someone doing math he didn't enjoy doing. 3 days, he said finally, and it's already ahead of mine by that much. 2 more to go, Marlowe said. Let's see where it lands. It landed exactly where everyone except Zira expected it to. By the 6th night, the full comparison sat there in the firelight for anyone to see. The paste arm had healed, technically. Functional, no infection, scarring forming the way scarring always did. But the honey arm had closed faster, cleaner, with a thin new layer of skin that barely showed where the cut had been at all. Ulzen held both arms up to the light without a word, turning them slowly, the way a man examines evidence he didn't expect to find convincing. Logged, he said finally. Full report. Comparative efficacy favors the honey treatment by a measurable margin. He didn't sound triumphant about it. He sounded like someone updating a fact he'd resisted longer than he should have. Zira stared at his own arm for a long moment, then at Marlowe's jar, sitting half empty now on the supply crate beside the fire. I would prefer not to touch it, he said slowly. The smell, the texture, all of it offends something in me I can't explain. He paused. But if I were wounded again out here, and that was the option in front of me, he stopped, started over. I would accept it. That from Zira landed harder than any of them expected. Even Vin's mandibles clicked once, which for a Threntite passed as visible surprise. Zun leaned forward, tapping a finger against his own field kit. The enzymatic process, he said. Glucose oxidase, I believe, converts to hydrogen peroxide on contact with moisture. Slow release. That's the mechanism behind the antimicrobial action, isn't it? Marlowe blinked at him. I just know it works. Didn't know the chemistry had a name. It has several, Zun said, almost gently. Your people simply found the result before anyone found the explanation. Pithala, healing arm wrapped but steady now, looked between all of them and said the thing none of the others quite wanted to say first. We give them flowers, he offered. They give us this. Nobody argued with that, either. The mundane part of the night came right after, the way it always did once the big moment had passed, and everyone needed something ordinary to settle back into. Marlowe sat by the fire, screwing the lid back onto his jar, checking how much honey was actually left. Less than he'd hoped. A third of the jar, maybe, the golden surface lower than it had been 3 weeks ago in a dome a planet away. He didn't think much of it. Just screwed the lid on, set it in his pack, and reached for his thermos, the dented metal one that had outlasted 3 deployments before this and would probably outlast a few more. That was the moment the wind started screaming differently. It didn't build slow. It hit the camp like something had been holding it back and finally let go, tent fabric snapping flat, the fire scattering sideways in a spray of sparks before someone managed to smother it. Ulzen was on his feet first, shouting orders the wind kept tearing apart before they reached anyone, and Marlowe was already moving toward his pack on instinct before his brain had finished registering what was happening. Survey was wrong by a lot more than half a day, he muttered, shoving the jar deeper into his pack where it wouldn't break. The storm that hit Theta 7 that night wasn't the storm the sensors had predicted. It was bigger, faster, the kind of system that formed over the planet's unstable weather belt and went from nothing to catastrophic in the space of an hour. Equipment that had stood firm through smaller storms came apart fast, tent poles bending, snapping, one section of the shelter frame tearing loose entirely and cartwheeling sideways through the camp like something thrown by a hand 20 times the size of any of them. Get to the ridge shelter, Elzen's voice raw now, cutting through the wind. Now move. They moved, all of them, packs half secured, boots sliding in mud that hadn't existed an hour earlier, the kind of mud that swallowed footing and didn't give it back easy. Vin was ahead of Marlowe, 6 arms working to keep balance on ground that no longer wanted to hold anyone steady, his rigid Threntite posture the only thing in camp that hadn't bent under the wind yet. Then the tent pole came loose. It didn't fall. It flew, caught broadside by a gust that turned a piece of camp equipment into something closer to a spear, and it found Vin's shoulder before anyone had time to shout a warning that would have mattered. Vin went down. The sound he made wasn't a scream exactly. Threntites didn't scream the way humans did. It was lower, worse somehow, a kind of grinding noise that came from somewhere deep in a body that had never been built to expect this kind of damage. Vinn, Zira's voice, the first time any of them had heard real panic in it. Marlowe was already running, mud throwing up behind his boots, every other thought in his head narrowing down to the one thing that mattered now. Blood, dark against the rain-soaked ground. A wound deep enough that Vin's controlled, literal precision had finally, completely broken. The temple went through Vin's shoulder before anyone heard the wind change. The line landed exactly where it had landed the first time, except this time there was nothing held back, nothing waiting in freeze frame. This time, the moment kept going. How much do you have left? Elzen shouted again, dropping into the mud to pin Vin's good arms down, the same words from 3 hours and 1 storm ago, except now there was no question of survey timelines or controlled comparisons. Now there was only mud, blood, wind, and a jar. Marlowe cracked the lid. 1/3 of a jar. That was all that stood between Vin keeping his arm and not. He didn't say it out loud. He didn't have time to. His hands were already moving, fast, sure, packing honey into a wound deep enough to make Zira's careful paced applications look like the practice runs they had actually been. Spores are wet, Zun shouted, voice cracking with something close to panic. They're useless. They won't activate through this much moisture. I know, Marlowe said. He didn't look up. Hold him steady. No paste, no spores, no backup plan beyond 1/3 of a jar and a kid who'd learned field medicine the hard way, in a place that didn't have a medbay 3 hours out either. He worked. He didn't speak again for a long time. The storm kept screaming, and somewhere in the dark beyond the floodlight, the extraction shuttle that should have already been inbound was fighting its own battle against weather nobody had predicted in time. 3 hours later, the rain had stopped, and Vin's arm was still attached. That was the only fact that mattered, and Marlowe learned it secondhand, sitting outside Medbay Sector 4 with mud dried stiff on his sleeves and an empty glass jar turning over and over in his hands. The shuttle had made it. Late, battered, one stabilizer fin torn half off by the storm, but it had made it, and that was the second fact that mattered. Elzen found him there, 2 new bandages wrapped around forearms that had nearly matched once and now told 2 very different stories. Medical team confirmed it, Elzen said. No infection, no fever, no tissue loss. He paused. He keeps the arm. Marlowe didn't say anything right away. He just looked down at the jar, empty now, not a trace of gold left clinging to the glass. Used the last of it on him, he said finally. Wasn't sure it would be enough. It was enough. Got lucky. Elzen tapped his data pad twice, the old habit, though for once he wasn't about to make an announcement. Luck doesn't explain 6 days of controlled results. Luck doesn't explain a burn that should have festered and didn't. He looked at Marlowe directly, something in his pale amber eyes that hadn't been there in the classroom 3 weeks ago. Your people didn't get lucky. They got patient. There's a difference. He held out a hand, palm up. Marlowe set the empty jar in it. The compendium update went up 2 days later, on the last morning of the course, displayed across every data pad in the dome at once. Ulzen stood at the front of the room, sleeves rolled down now, scars from the comparison test barely visible beneath the cuff. This course wasn't about finding the best medicine, he said. It was about understanding how each species survives with what they have. He paused, the way he always paused before something that mattered. Sometimes that survival means enduring pain. Sometimes it means trusting what worked before anyone could explain how. In this case, it meant trusting a golden substance processed by insects, something most of you dismissed in the first 5 minutes. He tapped the pad once more, and the new entry filled the main screen behind him. Honey, Arpis derivative, Earth origin, traditional field medicine, efficacy class 1, availability class 1, approved for INTRWORLD deployment. No statistics scrolled beneath it, no clinical disclaimer, just the words, plain as the substance itself. It healed a scrape faster than a treatment with 11 generations behind it, Ulzen said. It cleaned an infection a Rashari specialist couldn't catch in time, and it kept a cadet's arm attached during a storm survey didn't predict. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. No mercy from the weather, no warning from the instruments, no second chance if it hadn't worked. Nobody in the room moved. It worked. Pithala, healed arm flexing without pain now, was the first to ask the practical question. Procurement channels. Will the core stock it standard, or is this Earth supply only? Both, Ulzen said. Standard issue, Earth supplied for now. Synthesis research is already starting. Zun raised a hand, more curious than skeptical now. The enzymatic process. I'd like to study the synthesis pathway if access is permitted. Granted. Zira said nothing out loud, but he caught Marlowe's eye across the room and gave a single nod, the kind that cost a Gulsari more than most people understood. Marlowe nodded back. That was the whole conversation. It was enough. Vin arrived for graduation with his arm in a light support sling, more precaution than necessity. The wound beneath it closed clean and pale. He found Marlowe near the back of the assembly hall, where Marlowe always stood when ceremonies ran long. I calculated the odds, Vin said, without preamble, the way Threntites always opened conversations. Of the spores activating through that level of moisture, approximately none. Of the honey working under those conditions, also uncertain. But it did. Wasn't doing math out there, Marlowe said. Just doing what I knew. That is the part I find difficult to categorize, Vin admitted. Knowledge without calculation. My grandmother never calculated anything in her life, Marlowe said. Saved more limbs than half the medics I've met since. Vin considered that with the particular stillness of a species built for considering things. I would like to meet her. She'd like that. She'd also put honey on whatever you complained about first. For the first time in the entire course, Vin made a sound that might have been a laugh. 3 months later, the reports started coming in from across the deployed cadre, one at a time, then in a steady stream nobody had expected. Pithala, stationed on a Frost World relay outpost, sent back a field note about a colonist's frostbitten fingers, saved from amputation by packed honey dressing improvised from emergency rations. Zun, attached to a research vessel studying fungal pathogens, reported success vaporizing diluted honey to clear a stubborn species of airborne rot that nothing in the standard kit had touched. Zira, deployed to a colony recovering from a structural collapse, used the last of a supply Jar Marlowe had quietly given him before they shipped out, and credited it with keeping 3 wounded settlers from losing fingers to infection before evacuation arrived. None of them mentioned insect vomit anymore, not once. Marlowe kept one thing from the whole course, set on a shelf in his new quarters beside his field knife and his dog tags, The jar, empty now, scrubbed clean, the glass catching whatever light came through the small window above it. He didn't write a label for it, didn't need one. There was no ceremony to it, no graduation speech replayed in his head, no quiet music swelling somewhere behind his ribs. He just set it down, squared it against the wall the way he squared everything, and reached for his thermos instead, the same dented metal one that had outlasted 3 deployments and was about to start on a 4th. Outside, beyond the Academy's reinforced windows, a transport ship lifted off toward a new assignment, carrying cadets who'd never met him, who would never know his name, who would still, somewhere in a supply manifest a few clicks deep, find a jar of golden substance labeled in plain core print. Traditional field medicine, Earth origin, approved. When survival was on the line, humans didn't care where help came from. They just made sure it worked. And now the galaxy knew that too.